Hello, I'm Nick Jarrett-Kerr and I'm a member of global management consultancy Edge International. For those of you who don't know me, about 25 years ago, I had the very great honour, while I was still a managing partner of a UK law firm, of being one of the founder members of the law management section of the Law Society of England and Wales. And I subsequently became the chairman for a while. So it's a great honour for me to do this series of 4 podcasts headed Planning for Recovery, mainly for the law management section, but of course for lawyers and those involved in law management all over the world generally. So thank you in advance for listening. We plan here a series of 4 podcasts and the outlines as follows. Each one is going to be about 20 minutes. And in the first one, which we're going to do now, we will talk about first steps for recovery. We'll discuss crisis management and financial resilience. We'll look at some essential planning points, and we'll look at ways in which firms can start to restore equilibrium as countries and firms start moving out of lockdown into a different and less rigorously enforced regime. In the second episode, I will be dealing with the issue of interfacing with clients, how we do that during an era of social distancing, how we build and renew trust and confidence, particularly when we can't meet, and more importantly, the forgotten values of empathy. And then in the third podcast, we will start really getting more granular and building some plans for recovery. I've worked with many law firms all over the world and with practice groups particularly as they start to build up their own individual plans. And so I find a practice group approach works well for larger firms, but obviously for smaller firms it's usually a whole firm exercise. And in episode 3 we will be looking at ways in which we can harness the better and more potent opportunities. We do that by looking at the practice areas in depth for opportunities and threats. We look at ways in which we can reskill and redeploy staff, and then finally ways in which we can build an action plan for recovery. And this will lead to our 4th and final episode, in which we will look at business planning in this changed world, how we can review our operations, how we can develop bold but well thought out strategies, and finally I list 10 essentials for a business plan in critical times. But let's get started on this first episode, which is first steps. And what I'm going to try and focus on is really practical advice that can be executed quickly, if of course it's not too late. As has been pointed out, for some firms it may already be too late. There's been a comment about a firm recently who got taken over, having gone into administration, and Sean Bucknell from administration experts Quantuma commented that this particular administration could well be the first of many. There will be fallout. There was another survey at the start of the pandemic which showed that more than half firms had insufficient cash reserves to cover 1 month's expenses. Prudent financial planning tells us that probably is not enough to weather a crisis. Additionally, the Law Society have recently carried out some research which shows that over 70% of firms felt that they might have to close their doors in the next 6 months due to the effects of the pandemic. So that's the background in which we are facing. And in this background, we need to see the ability to respond quickly. We need firms to be looking at careful research, but not paralysis by analysis. And we need to think about how we're going to come out of the pandemic, as well as ways of coping during it. This may mean for some firms changing for a long time the focal point or balance of their practice. But we also need to start to build robust systems and a more resilient culture. So that's the theme that I want to follow through. And in these first steps to recovery, we're first of all going to look at crisis management and financial resilience, and then some essential planning points, and then finally how we might seek ways of restoring equilibrium. So crisis management and financial resilience, and the point here is what we can learn from the current crisis. It's too late in the day to start talking about how you can start to cope. But I think what we're learning as we move through this pandemic is that firms need to have in place some way of managing when a crisis hits. Now, I've had the big advantage of managing a law firm during the first recession in the late 90s, followed by helping a lot of law firms through the 2008-2009 financial recession. And now, of course, we have the COVID-19 one. Could we learn from that? Crisis management. It's most important for the leadership team to have around them a team who can respond quickly when crisis hits. After all, we need to have leadership from the very front of the firm. Good communication has been found to be absolutely vital in helping to calm people down and to alleviate stress. It's also vital to build good information flows that we can shower down, cascade down through the firm. People respond better when they know what's going on. They hate uncertainty. And finally, we need to think about how we can plan for business continuity, known as a business continuity plan. And I'll be dealing with more of that at episode 4, but just for the moment to highlight that if you go to my consulting firm's website, that's www.edge.ai, there are some very good resources on business continuity plans. The important thing also is learning financial resilience. I think what we're learning more and more is that cash is king, and the management of working capital and receivables is vital. In many ways, law firms, it takes a while for cash to dry up, because for many law firms, they're reliant for this month's cash on billings that were and revenue that were invoiced 2 or 3 months ago. And so at the start of the crisis, although our clients were probably slowing up their payment plans, nevertheless, money was still coming in. And it's now at this time, now we're a couple of months into it, that the effects of the lack of work in March and April of 2020 are beginning to come home to roost. So how do we manage working capital and receivables? And I'll be covering that a bit later on. It's also important to manage our costs and manage our creditors and our bank at the same time. So financial resilience, having a financial resilience plan, is something we have to learn from the current pandemic. So what should we be doing now? I think the firm should be looking to balance, obviously, urgent and critical steps with important things. To differentiate, if you will, between planning for the current crisis, but also balancing that with long-term improvement planning while we go, and also maintaining our high-level strategy, our vision, our big plan for the future. It's important at this stage to continue to create or recreate a sense of common purpose in our firm. And this usually means communicating even more than we ever did. You can't really communicate too much. And I think it's important to bring the leadership group together, partners or other leaders, even virtually, to keep fostering a climate of collaboration and reassurance. So what I'm suggesting is not just meetings for administration purposes, which is obviously important, but also meetings online with a view to fostering collaboration. The second thing I think people should be doing is spending time in having a jolly good look at the market and your resources to cope with it. What's going on? Which clients are suffering? Which sectors are suffering? Which are going to bounce back quickly? Indeed, what's the view about the bounce back? There are some people who are suggesting optimistically that this is an enforced recession and when it comes to an end, there will be a huge and very quick bounce back. I have no idea whether that's right or not. I hope it is. But you need to take a view for your particular market, what's going to happen. Obviously, if you're a firm that's involved in heavily transactional business, conveyancing, mergers and acquisitions and so on, then you'll be particularly badly hit during the moment. If your firm is very highly reliant on litigation, then obviously you're having to cope with the ways of working with courts and other institutions at this time. But how are your resources best placed to deal with that? I can't answer that question. I can only ask the question. But what I do think is also important is that we seek this opportunity to have a good look at your structure, governance, and also your culture for extra progressive management. And I'll be coming back to that in another of the episodes. What we need at all times, but particularly now, is a clear decision-making structure. We don't want to have to go round continually in circles, second-guessing, getting our partners to second-guess, having to go through endless cycles of meetings and discussions before arriving at a decision. We also need performance management that can adapt to working from home and promotes instead a culture of discipline. I'm going to be mentioning later how some junior professionals are finding it quite a release to be able to get on with work in their own time, in their own place. And not all, some require a bit more direction than others. But in that time of giving them trust and empowering them, there's also a need at the same time to balance us off by being able to look at more frequently at measures of productivity to see who's got enough work, who's working hard, who's struggling, and so on. Above all, the structure and the governance needs to be adapted towards a complete firm that's pulling together and prepared to invest and adapt. I've spent a lot of time over the last few years working with firms trying to balance these issues so to get a more efficient management structure, more devolved powers to managing partners and boards, and yet not making partners and the rest of the firm feeling left out or underempowered. And it's important to get that balance right. So now I'd like to move on to the question of restoring equilibrium in these uncertain times. And I was interested to learn about the whole concept of homeostasis. This is the ability, both of a firm and an individual, to achieve an optimal state of equilibrium whenever there's a big change going on by rebalancing internal and external turbulences, their own behaviors, their own ways of doing things, and so on. And there are several ways in which this can be achieved. The first way is obviously the question of communication, which I've mentioned earlier. Communication to reduce stress and by painting a clear and compelling plan for the new working environment. Leaders should not hesitate to repeat themselves in different ways on this point. You can't over-communicate when restoring equilibrium. The second thing is obviously working on the physical environment, as many firms are doing, as they plan how a return to offices can be conducted. For some, maybe this is going to be an end to the open plan experiment. Closed offices make a lot more sense if an epidemic is with us. For others, it will mean working on screens and social distancing and possibly rotas for people coming into work. Some, not everybody coming to work at the same time. At the same time, we need to see in terms of a longer term, because it's going to go on for a while, the flexing of the way in which we relate to each other to adapt to more remote and more technological ways of working. I think this is where older partners have had to learn how to deal with technology more. In the past, they've been able perhaps sometimes to get away with not, but now it is very much the case that technology is with us. Technology is improving. Technology needs to be harnessed to help us through not just this crisis, but help us to be more efficient for clients, which is a subject that I will be covering in the second of these 4 podcasts. So in this, here are 4 practical ideas for things you can do. The first thing is to incorporate in your planning a methodology that assesses which meetings work better through live streaming rather than hauling people into offices or into a single place. And this, I'm talking about long term here. I was speaking to one young professional the other day who told me that one of the meetings he has regularly had to attend has been a 1-hour meeting in London for which he's had to travel for 2 hours. And generally that meeting is pretty well administrative. It's nothing more than going through activities and tasks and objectives. Now that this firm is finding is being much better conducted via live streaming, and the thinking is that will probably continue. The second I mentioned before is how to encourage less competent professionals to harness technology better. Training, is it support? Is it mentoring? Is it help? Do you need to go on and give people some practical help on Zoom and video conferencing? It's not difficult. People have this big barrier over it, but it's important that people should continue to learn. There's also needs to be a recognition that, as has been found from the current pandemic, that some professionals cope with working from home much better than others. Obviously there's the question of young children around your feet, which is an obvious point, but other people prefer to work in an atmosphere of a team. They work better when there are people around them, whereas others love working from home. And there should be no hard and fast rule in your firm. You should be able to find ways of balancing that off so that people who really like working from home can continue to do that for some of the time. And as I mentioned before, directed empowerment works best. Junior professionals relishing the trust placed in them as they're given more responsibility to arrange their working day. So all these are ways in which, as a summary, are overall for the first steps that we can look at how we can achieve more. We need to think about crisis management and business continuity, and particularly the need for a crisis management team. Have you got that right now? Is it too late for you to augment that, change it a bit? What about business continuity plans? Have you got those in place? Are you thinking about them? Maybe now's not the time to create a business continuity plan for the long term, but certainly now is the time to get down before you forget the essential learning points that you've found from the current crisis. Now, we'll be coming back to business continuity a bit later. Then there are essential planning points. And one of the things that I wanted to stress very much was not just the creating of a common purpose, but how you can take a jolly good look again at what's going on in your market and your resources to be able to adapt and shift to new ways of working. And then finally, there's the whole question of restoring equilibrium when you can, making sure that people are comfortable, happy, understand what the firm is doing, that they know what they're coming back to when the office is open, but they also know that there's going to be continued flexibility for more remote working. Those are the things that we've covered in this first one. I hope this has been useful to you, but if in any event, I would invite you to contact me. My email is up here, and I'll leave that open for a minute as we conclude. Do look at www.edge.ai for further resources. Do email me if something in here you want to question or want to take further with me. Do contact me. Email is probably the best at this stage. And I hope very much that you'll tune in to the next 3 podcasts. Remember, the next one is about clients, the third one is about practice groups, and the fourth one is about overall planning. Thank you very much indeed for listening.